live on the same grounds as my mother, who lives alone in a house that faces ours now that my father has passed away. Last summer, I was washing dishes in the kitchen after breakfast when some movement outside caught my eye. One of the leaves on the Fatsia plant outside the window was moving. It looked just like someone shaking it. There was no wind, so I opened the window to check what was going on. Then, I saw the light on in my mother's toilet. She never turned the lights on during the day to save money, so this was weird. I grabbed my duplicate key and rushed over. There, I saw my mother's feet poking out from behind the half-open toilet door. She had suffered a stroke. She got up during the night to use the toilet, then suddenly passed out. Luckily, the ambulance soon arrived and she was okay. Looking back on it now, I think it was my father's spirit who shook that leaf. He was trying to let me know that my mother needed urgent help. Those who can see ghosts probably would have seen him standing there. I wish I could have. When I think about how desperately and wildly he must have been shaking the plant, I can't help but smile a little. Hey guys, I'm your host, Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. In case you missed it, Toshiden Exploring Japanese Urban Legends Volume 4 is now available. Once again, there are a host of new legends to explore, both horrifying, bizarre, and otherwise. And of course, a new season of the podcast that has just wrapped up. So, if you haven't checked it out yet, it's available right now. You can also find the audiobook for the first volume of Toshiden either on our Patreon, Fourth Wall store, or various audiobook outlets, including Spotify and Audible. So don't miss out on that either if you're still looking for more. This week, we're looking at some tales from the other side, and what exactly it might be trying to communicate with us. First up, a university student gets a call from his girlfriend late one night, and he quickly realizes something is wrong. But being exhausted from work, all he wants to do is sleep. Why has she called him so late? Find out in Phone. "4 years or so have passed since this happened. My good friend A was going out with a girl he met at university at the time. I was also seeing a girl, so the four of us often hung out together. And this particular story happened one cold winter night, around 4 years ago. On this particular day, A worked until late at his video rental store job, and by the time he got home, it was around 2 a.m. Being the weekend, the store was busier than usual, and as soon as he got home, he went to bed and fell asleep. But before long, the sound of his phone ringing woke him up. When he answered, it was his girlfriend. "What's up? Why are you calling me so late?" he asked, annoyed at the late hour of the call. She spoke happily, like always, but A could tell immediately that something was wrong. "Ah, you're still up? Sorry," she said. But it appeared she was in an area with bad reception, as her voice kept cutting in and out. "Where are you?" A asked. "I told you the other day that some of my friends from back home were coming to visit. We're going for a late-night drive," she said. "Ah, yeah, you did mention that," my friend said, remembering their earlier conversation. "Well, you shouldn't stay out too late. I can't hear you very well. Are you on the highway?" A was sleepy and wanted to quickly hang up so he could go back to bed. But for some reason, his girlfriend kept trying to keep him on the line, and she kept talking about all sorts of inconsequential things, like places where he could find a better job or how he shouldn't eat too much because it always upset his stomach. "Look, what's wrong? Are you okay?" A finally asked. At that, his girlfriend fell silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, It sounded like she was crying. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's nothing. I'm sorry," she kept repeating. A was concerned, but he was also exhausted, and after promising that he'd see her tomorrow, they hung up. Early the next morning, A got a call from his girlfriend's mother. While his girlfriend and her friends were driving along the coast the previous night, they had slammed into the median strip and had an accident. According to the crew who found them, all 4 friends had been flung from the vehicle and died on impact. A's girlfriend was the only one still alive when they got there, but she then passed away on the way to the hospital. A visited his girlfriend's house after lunchtime, and the moment her exhausted mother saw him, she cried and embraced him. "I'm so sorry. She's gone. I'm so sorry," she repeated over and over. For some reason, it reminded him of what his girlfriend kept saying the previous night. Once things calmed down, her mother then handed him something. It was his girlfriend's broken phone. According to her mother, the phone strap was wrapped tightly around her right hand as she was being taken to the hospital. A asked her what time she was taken there, and was suddenly filled with doubt. Apparently, they arrived at the hospital at 2:35 a.m. But A was talking to her on the phone at that exact time. After explaining this to her mother, they then checked her phone history. And there, at 2:35 a.m., it showed she had been in a call. "If only I didn't hang up," A still says regretfully whenever he remembers what happened. The young man in this next story finds himself too scared to sleep with all the lights off. But while he's trying to get the right levels in his room, he notices something he shouldn't have. Find out what in Turning the Lights On. I got scared reading this thread, so I decided to sleep with the lights on. But when I started thinking about my electricity bill, I live alone, I decided to leave just one on. But out of habit, I turned them all off. One pull of the string turned off light A. Another pull turned off light B, leaving the mini bulb on. And another pull, for 3 in total, turned them all off. Naturally, my room went pitch black. Panicking, I pulled the string again, trying to get some light back. Once, A and B went on. Once more, A went off. Once more, B went off, and the mini bulb was still on. But one mini bulb alone is still kinda scary, right? It almost looks like twilight. And so, in the end, I panicked and pulled the string 3 more times. Once, the mini bulb went off. Again, A and B went on. Once more, A turned off. Normally, this would be perfectly fine, but right as the light flickered, I saw it. A man I didn't know pulling the string with me. He appeared to be enjoying himself quite a lot. But as soon as the room filled with light, he disappeared. A young man on his way home through an apartment complex stumbles upon something he shouldn't have late one night. The police are also confused, but matters are about to get even more confusing once they start investigating. Find out why in Landscape Picture. My friend, M-kun, is able to see ghosts, and this is a strange story he once told me. There's a large apartment complex in front of the station in the city where we live in, and Whenever M-kun has to use the station, he walks through it. One day, he passed through the complex like always on his way home. He still had some work to do, so he walked a little faster than usual. Normally, this area was full of children playing outside, or housewives on their way home from shopping. It was generally pretty busy, but being so late, it was now empty as he walked through. Once he'd passed the first two buildings, he approached a small park that had nothing but a sandpit, a bench, and some swings. But there, he spotted someone. What on earth are they doing out this late at night? He wondered, squinting to see better. But then he realized who, or what, it was. A woman. Or perhaps more appropriately, a now dead woman. What on earth had he stumbled upon? You would think in such a situation that he might panic and run away, but M-kun was a pretty tough guy, and instead, he was almost annoyed as he took out his phone to call the police. Numerous onlookers were also hanging around by the time the police arrived, and he found himself subjected to quite a lengthy questioning session. He and the officer sat on the bench next to the sandpit, facing the tree where the woman was found, and the officer asked him the same questions over and over. In the end, he was not in any position to do work once he finally did get back home, so instead he went straight to bed. The next morning, when M-kun woke up, he got a call from the police as he was getting ready for work. They asked him to come to the station right away. M-kun explained that he had to go to work, and that he'd already explained numerous times the night before what happened. "No, there's something we'd like you to see," they replied. And, confused, he reluctantly made his way towards the police station. When he got there, the same officer from the night before greeted him and showed him into a room. M-kun immediately asked why they had called him in, and the officer looked somewhat nervous as he mumbled something. M-kun stared at him, confused. "Well, you see, of course, we've never seen that woman before, but I asked her mother to look around for any note she might have left behind. But she found something weird instead." Once he started talking, it was like a dam breaking, and then he pulled a scrapbook out of a brown envelope. "I'd like you to take a look at this." M-kun took the scrapbook and started flicking through the pages. It appeared she attended an art school, as there were pictures of fruits, furniture, etc. on the pages. But there was one landscape picture mixed in with them, and that particular landscape looked familiar. There were some swings, a sandpit, and a tree next to that with a woman. Then there was a bench, with what appeared to be a police officer and young man sitting on it. This sketchbook was found in a locked drawer, and the only fingerprints on it belonged to that woman. Either way, the police questioned him relentlessly about his relationship with her. "But why are you here too?" M-kun retorted. And the panicked pair almost got into a fight over it. In the end, they were unable to get anywhere, and M-kun was allowed to leave. The incident was chalked up as self-inflicted, and that was that. M-kun has seen ghosts and such before, but he said that was the strangest and most terrifying thing he has ever experienced. A grandson waits by his grandfather's bedside as he's sick in the hospital. But when his grandfather suddenly requests for an extra chair one day, he's confused as to what his grandfather is seeing that he isn't. Are they really as alone as they look? Find out in Visitor. One winter, as my high school exams were approaching, my usually healthy grandfather started complaining of pains in his stomach, so he was taken to the hospital. Test results showed it was liver cancer, and it had progressed beyond treatment. Around the end of March, I successfully finished my tests and graduated. I was enjoying my final junior high spring holidays, but day by day, my grandfather was getting thinner and thinner. We took turns staying by his side each day. Then my busy father and younger sister fell ill, so because I had the most free time, I spent my days by my grandfather's side until my father got home from work. Satoru? What is it, Grandpa? It was 9 p.m, after lights out. My father had told me he'd be late coming home that day, but as I sat on a chair reading a book, my grandfather tilted his head and looked at me. A chair. A chair? My grandfather wasn't strong enough to even turn over by himself anymore, so why would he need a chair? I was confused. Get a chair. Why do you want a chair? Yasuo's coming. Looking closer, my grandfather wasn't actually looking at me, but rather at the door behind me. For a moment, I broke out in goosebumps all over, and an indescribable fear gripped me. Yasuo-san was my grandfather's older brother, who had died from a cerebral hemorrhage just 1 week earlier. While everyone was busy with his funeral, they had discussed whether they should even tell my grandfather, but in the end, they decided not to. Get a chair. I told myself he must be seeing things because of the painkillers, but it made me feel so uneasy that I pulled out a chair and put it in the empty space next to me anyway. My grandfather grunted in response, then continued staring into space. And so I sat next to this empty chair as silence filled the room. The only sound was that of the clock on the wall ticking, and time itself seemed to drag on into oblivion. Satoru? 5 minutes later, my grandfather suddenly broke that silence. Yasuo said he's going now. I'll see him out then. I don't know why I answered like that, but I wanted nothing more than for him to leave the room, and so I put the chair away and rushed out of the room. The only sound in the empty hall was that of my slippers. I passed the nurse's station, and then I gave a small bow in front of the closed elevator with a tiny light on. This just made me feel even more creeped out, however, and so I rushed back to my grandfather's room. When I got back, I turned all the lights on and downed my now room temperature drink. I reached out for the TV, hoping to distract myself with it until my father arrived. But then I noticed my grandfather, whose eyes had been closed when I left, was once again staring at me. What? Satoru, you have to see him out. I told my mother what happened a few days later, and she said that as his condition worsened, visitors came to see him almost every single day. A youngster has to look after his cousins one day, and they decide to pass the time by playing hide and seek. As we know, nothing can ever go wrong when you're home alone and play hide and seek. So where exactly has one of his cousins gone? Find out in Are You Ready? This happened when I was in the 6th grade. Something urgent came up, and some of my relatives had to go far away for the day, so they left their kids with us. It was Saturday, and my parents already had plans, so I ended up staying home to look after them. My cousins were a boy, 7, and a girl, 5, and they kept pestering me to play with them. Not like I had much choice, so I asked the girl what she wanted to do, and she said she wanted to play hide and seek. My cousins ran off to hide while I counted to 50. The boy hid in a closet, so I quickly found him, but no matter where I looked, I couldn't find the girl. And so I decided to call out and find her based on her voice. "Are you ready?" "Yes," came the response. She really was just a kid. Seemed she was hiding under the bed. Without making a sound, I crept over and looked under the bed. But she wasn't there. I called out again, and this time I heard stifled laughter. So she was in the closet then. But when I checked, it was empty. Her brother helped me look, but we just couldn't find her anywhere. "I give up," I said, growing worried. "You can come out now." The bathroom door opened and she stepped out smiling. But I had already searched there. "Where were you hiding?" I asked. "It's a secret," she said, refusing to elaborate. We played some video games after that, but I just couldn't wrap my head around it. As night fell, their father arrived to pick them up, and my cousins went home. Then, as bedtime approached, I got into bed. But I couldn't stop thinking about that game of hide and seek. And, as I was drifting off, I heard a voice in my dark room. "Are you ready?" Huh? My eyes flung open in surprise, and again I heard that same voice. "Are you ready?" It was faint, but undeniably a real voice. I buried myself further under the blankets before I could stop myself. That wasn't a 5-year-old girl's voice. It sounded like an older woman. "Are you ready?" The voice was getting closer. In a panic, I started trembling. Still, there were only 2 answers to that question. I couldn't say yes, so instead I muttered, barely louder than a mosquito, "Not yet." "Are you ready?" I think the voice was now right by my bedside. "Oh, they're going to find me," I thought. And then the blanket covering my head was yanked off. I opened my eyes and screamed, but nobody was there. Hearing the noise, my father came running into the room. "What's wrong? What happened?" Trembling, I replied, "My blanket went flying." The young boy in this next story goes to stay with his grandmother for a while, and he's warned not to look at the mirror in his room. Otherwise, he'll see something strange. But what's wrong with this mirror, and what exactly will he see? Find out in Thing in the Mirror. When I was in the 1st grade, I went to stay at my grandmother's house for a week. "The mirror reflects something strange, so you mustn't look at it," she told me. The room I was staying in was 6 tatami mats large and had a rather old-looking dresser in it. The room was dark even during the day, and even with the lights on, wasn't that bright. As I was cleaning the room up to make it a little easier to stay in, I forgot my grandmother's warning and removed the cloth from the mirror. And besides, I was at that age where I always had to do the opposite of what I was told anyway. One morning, I Don't remember exactly what happened, but I think I reached for a jar on the dresser and saw my hand in the mirror. It was a soft, almost white hand. Huh? I thought, and turned to look at the mirror directly. There I was, reflected in it. But the room was so dark that the image wasn't very distinct. A faint light was coming in through the window, so I could see a little better if I squinted over there. But when I suddenly looked up, I could only see the outline of my face. The shape and the angle of my body. That was definitely all me. You can tell these sorts of things even without seeing the finer details. And it's not like you stand completely still in front of a mirror either. The movement of my shoulders and arms, and all the tiny movements my body made, were all reflected back at me. But that reflection in the mirror wasn't me. They were wearing a kimono. Even though I could only see the outline, the reflection was clearly wearing different clothes. And as my eyes slowly adjusted, I saw that the figure in the mirror strangely had messy hair, whereas my head was shaved. I moved to turn the lights on. The figure in the mirror did the same. I wanted to check my face in the mirror, but for some reason, I suddenly abandoned that plan and left the room instead. Oddly, I wasn't that scared at the time. I remembered my grandmother's warning, but at the time I thought something strange would be more, well, visually different and distorted. That was no doubt thanks to my interest in tokusatsu and manga. My grandmother has now passed away, so there's no way for me to find out what it exactly was that she was warning me about. Looking back on it now, it was probably for the best that I didn't turn the lights on. It was a rather chilling experience, but when someone said the following to me, I couldn't stop shaking. Which made me think, was it really just something being reflected in the mirror? When you looked at your face, then your eyes no doubt met, huh? A bus driver is forced to switch buses after his usual one breaks down, but something feels odd about this new one. It keeps creaking and making sounds like there are people on board, even though it's very clearly empty. What's really going on? Find out in Night Shift on the Bus. I'm a bus driver in Kanagawa Prefecture, and this is something strange that happened to me just yesterday. I was scheduled for the afternoon shift, which in all honesty is actually the night shift. After my break, I left the depot on an out-of-service bus so I could get to the coastal route I was scheduled to run. The air conditioner on the bus I was driving during the first part of my shift broke, so I had to quickly change to another bus, but I'd never driven this bus before, and I'm honestly not a fan of vehicles that I don't know. Another driver inspected the bus while I was on my break, so I gave it just a quick once-over myself before setting off. But as soon as I hit the road, something felt wrong. The floor was creaking, even though the bus was empty. Well, it was an old bus, so creaks in old frames like this wasn't that uncommon. But it honestly sounded like footsteps, and those footsteps were getting closer to the driver's seat. Of course, this frightened me, so I pulled over at a bus bay and checked the rear of the bus. There, I found a fat, stray cat. I let it off and then continued on my way. I thought the cat would make for a funny story when I got back, and laughed in relief. I was no longer anxious about the bus itself either. Then I finally arrived at a bus stop. It was around 9 p.m, but being so far from the busy business district, it was empty even on a Friday night. Being such a hot night, and Figuring that there wouldn't be any passengers anyway, I turned the bus off, opened the doors, and then closed my eyes for a quick nap while I waited for departure in 10 minutes' time. But the moment I closed my eyes, I heard a series of beeps. This was the sound the bus made when passengers entered through the rear door, but the sound kept going off. Are there really that many passengers? I thought, as I looked in the rearview mirror. But nobody was there. And yet, the beeps continued unabated. Naturally, there was no way it could be a cat this time. I thought perhaps the sensor might be broken, but then it suddenly stopped. This time, I heard the sound of an IC card touching the reader. Ghosts can use IC cards? I thought suddenly, and then laughed before I could stop myself. When I looked at the display, it said 9,999 yen. After that, some regular passengers got on, and I was able to finish the route without issue. I checked the dashcam footage once I was done, and everything was right there on full display. The other drivers laughed. It sucks that we couldn't investigate the IC card issue by ourselves, though. For me, a guy who has to constantly scrimp and scrape, I was honestly a little envious of this apparently rich ghost. While I remember, the factory just checked the bus and said there was nothing wrong with it. I'm actually looking forward to tonight's run, though. As a child, the narrator of this next story had a terribly weak stomach, leading to their mother often rationing and spacing out their food. But of course, kids will be kids, and if they want something, they'll find ways to get it. Even if that requires ghostly help, it seems. Find out what's really going on in On the Fridge. I heard this story from my mother. It happened when I was 3 or 4 years old. According to her, when I was a kid, I had a rather weak stomach, and I couldn't even drink a small child-sized juice without upsetting it. As such, I'd have to drink it in parts. Still, I was just a kid, so I often threw a tantrum because I wanted to drink more and more. One day, I was home alone with my mother. If she left the juice in the fridge, then I could just open the door to retrieve it myself. And so, at a loss for what to do, she left it on the fridge instead. As I threw a tantrum, she took her eyes off me to go back to her housework. But then, apparently, I suddenly fell quiet. Finding this strange, she returned to the living room and found me enjoying the juice that she had just left on top of the fridge. Our fridge was around the size of a full-grown adult, so there was simply no way that a child as small as me could have reached the top. "How did you get that?" my mother asked. "They gave it to me," I replied happily. At that, my mother looked scared. "Who did?" "The ghost," I answered without hesitation. My mother said she almost passed out. "Well, they must be a very kind ghost," she said. But that's not all. My mother said this type of thing often happened when I was a child. One time, we went to visit a relative in the hospital, and apparently, I started crying in an empty hall. "There are lots of scary people here. I want to go home," I said. She also apparently saw me throwing a ball by myself numerous times as well, as though I was throwing it to another person. One thing I personally remember has to do with my sister, who's 4 years younger than me. She was 3 at the time, and we were sitting in the back seat on our way home from visiting a family member. Suddenly, she turned around and started waving at something behind us. Maybe she's waving at the car behind us, I thought. "Who are you waving at?" I asked.
"There are lots of people in the water. They're all waving this way, so I'm waving back," she said.
We were nowhere near the ocean. We were in the countryside, far inland, and because I was already in elementary school by then, I remember being really freaked out. It seems both my sister and I often scared our mother when we were younger. I'm sorry, Mum. Both of us are grown up now, however, and we don't have even the smallest bit of a sixth sense. I don't remember any of what supposedly happened either. I wonder if it's true that children often see those types of things, though. A high school boy wakes up one night to find a woman in a kimono leaning by his bedside. She looks like something out of a period drama, but who is she and what does she really want? Find out in Woman in the Kimono. When I was in high school, for some unexplainable reason, the ghost of a woman appeared before me. I couldn't recall visiting any haunted locations, nor anything that might summon a ghost to me, so I was rather confused. One night, I suddenly woke up and there she sat, a woman in a kimono right next to my bed. Scared, I turned to face the other way and pulled the blanket up over my head. I told myself I was just seeing things and went back to sleep. Looking back on it the next day, I realized I wasn't suffering from sleep paralysis, so I told myself it must have been a dream and that was that. But she appeared again and again after that. Not every single night, because some nights I slept the entire night away and other nights I woke up and she wasn't there. And yet sometimes, when I turned the lights off and got into bed, then realized I needed to use the toilet, I'd open my eyes and she was already there. Her kimono was dark and her hair disheveled, but in a traditional style. She sat a little to my right, around where my knees were, and she seemed to be leaning over me, slightly hunched, like a nurse watching over a patient. She looked like a married woman you might find living in a poor tenement in a period drama. About a month after she first appeared, it was starting to really wear me down. My friends just made fun of me and told me it was a dream when I brought it up with them. But sadly, I didn't know anyone who could see ghosts either. But thinking about it, she never tried to hurt me and she didn't seem to have a grudge against me either. So why did she keep appearing in my room? What connected me to this woman who looked to be from a period drama? Was she trying to tell me something? Did she want me to do something for her? What else could I do? I had to ask her. Is there something you'd like to say? Or something you want me to do for you? I asked internally when she appeared one night. But she didn't react. I tried asking again and again, but she didn't respond. I heard that praying in your mind had an effect on ghosts, but it seemed this wasn't working. Readying myself, I got out of bed, sat next to my pillow, and spoke directly to her. I thought it would be rude to do so while still in bed. I said, and then the woman's head moved. Huh, she can move, I thought, growing more afraid, but I continued. Is there something you'd like to tell me? Or, something I can do for you? My heart pounded wildly with fear as I waited for her response. She slowly sat up and answered in a tiny voice as she continued staring at the bed. Well, there is one thing. She spoke. Yes? What? I asked. My heart pounded as I waited for her reply. Then She put her hands on the ground and deeply lowered her head.
Please don't come here anymore.
As soon as she said that, she turned pale and then disappeared right in front of my eyes. It was such an unexpected answer that I didn't know how to respond. Wait, no, but you're the one who keeps coming here. If she appeared again, that was exactly what I planned to tell her, but it seemed that she was satisfied after conveying her message because I never saw her again. Finally this week, a young boy often spots a woman in a blue dress on his way home from school. But who is she and what does she want? And why is she still haunting him decades later? Find out in Woman in the Blue Dress. This is a scary, or perhaps more accurately, strange story that happened to me. When I was in elementary school, I often saw a woman wearing a blue one-piece dress. I don't remember when I first saw her, but I started learning calligraphy in the 3rd grade, and I remember seeing her on the very same day I started that, so it must have been some time before then. But it seemed nobody else could see her but me. Whenever she appeared, she was always standing on a street I had to use, and every single time, she looked my way and grinned at me. I always took a different road when I was able to, but sometimes I had to go that way. So when I did, I kept my head down and rushed past her. And if I ever turned back, she would turn to look at me too, still grinning. This woman always wore a blue dress with buttons down the front, and she looked to be in her late 30s or so. But over time, she appeared less and less, and by the time I was in high school, I pretty much never saw her again. Several years later, I met a woman named Eiko. We started dating and then eventually got married. Apparently, her parents eloped when they were younger, so she had almost no relatives that they were close to. As such, we didn't hold a wedding ceremony. Instead, we just had a small dinner with my parents, her mother, her father had passed away by that point, and her siblings. During that dinner, Eiko and her mother often brought up the name Aunt Shizuko-san, alias. Aunt Shizuko-san was her mother's older sister, and the only family member who kept in contact with them after they eloped. She was also there to help when Eiko's father passed away, and when Eiko's mother was diagnosed with cancer and had to undergo surgery after that too. However, she herself then passed away from cancer just a few months before I met Eiko. Eiko and I moved in together after that, and I don't remember what the occasion was, but she showed me one of her photo albums, and there was a picture of Aunt Shizuko-san inside. I could barely believe my eyes. It was the woman in the blue dress. Her clothes were obviously different, but I was so shocked that I told Eiko about it. I'd only ever briefly mentioned this to her before. "Wait, do you mean this dress?" she asked, turning the pages and stopping on a photo where Aunt Shizuko-san was wearing that exact same dress. Apparently, she made it herself and was quite fond of it. But after doing the math, when I was in the 3rd grade, her aunt would have been in her late 20s or so, and she didn't die until her late 40s. When I saw her aunt, she looked to be in her late 30s, and looking at the photo Eiko had, she looked exactly the same as the woman I saw, even her hairstyle. Why I saw her as some weird period in between her actual age and when she died still baffles me to this day. And I'm still curious as to the meaning behind that creepy grin she had as well. Judging by her photo alone, she appeared to be an incredibly kind person, and she always looked after her younger sister even against their parents' wishes. Yet the impression given to me by the person I saw was nothing but creepy. What on earth does it all mean? A massive thank you and shout out to this week's Kami tier members, Emerald and Kenneth Kawamoto. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to check out Toshiden, Exploring Japanese Urban Legends Volume 4, out right now. And check out our merchandise store at kowabana-shop.fourthwall.com. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.